All right. Hello, everybody. This is Andrew Hunzicker again. We're going to jump in, have a really exciting podcast today. You all know legalization of cannabis is literally sweeping the nation like wildfire. CBD hemp as well. New York and Virginia, both just in the last couple of weeks, came on board as well. We're going to see more of that. We're up around, I think, 40 something states, partially, at least partially, if not fully legal. And we're getting places like New York, yeah, that are literally massive population. It's hard to even guess how big the New York market's going to be. Even Virginia is another huge state as well. And so we've got actually Rick, a CPA in New York. I can't wait to hear information about how that's going. He's got a lot of great experience out of Big Four manager. It's funny, yeah, that's as high as I made it as well before I left to go out into the CFO world. And also on the New York State CPA Cannabis Committee. So that is awesome. And when I saw that, it's anytime someone in our program is participating somehow broader than just like bombarding people on LinkedIn saying, hey, do you want to hear my pitch or whatever, but actually getting involved in the industry is a huge way to get in front of business owners. So with that, Rick, let me turn it over to you. Tell us more about your background, how you got into accounting, and then specifically this niche.
Sure. So thank you for having me on the show, first of all. My background is I was in financial services my entire career. I started off as just an accountant at a Big Four firm doing audit of big global financial service companies. And then I stayed there for 5 years. I left after my first year of manager. I actually got promoted to manager a year early, which helped me leave after 5 years of being a manager. And the next three jobs I had were as the right-hand man to CFOs at public companies. And those were all very interesting jobs in and of themselves. I worked on 2 or 3 IPOs, led a bunch of mergers, and then just big projects for those CFOs every day. But what people don't realize is public company CFOs, their average lifespan is about 3 years, 3 to 5
Wow.
years.
Wow.
Yeah, I got lucky that my CFOs all lasted about 5 years. So that sprint, it was like a 15-year run there for me, 10 to 15 years. But every time they turn over as the right-hand man, I get turned over as well, either right away or after the new CFO wants their new guy. So after that happened a couple of times, took matters into my own hand and started my own consulting firm, doing management consulting. So there's a lot of what I did, working for CFOs basically was internal management consulting. Did that for about 2.5 years. I was chatting with one of my clients one day, just catching up with them over lunch. He asked me if I've ever thought about going into, doing accounting or doing some sort of consulting in the cannabis world. I actually hadn't. He told me he had 1 or 2 friends who were in the technology side of the world, and they were doing very well in the cannabis space, and he encouraged me to just go to a couple networking events. I went to 1 or 2 networking events in the New York City, New Jersey area. Completely different than any sort of networking event I've ever been to, or especially as someone in finance and big global corporations their whole time. I'm used to going to networking events where it's like all old white guys in the room who already have their own cliques and they don't want to talk to anybody else. And I walked into this networking event. It's a vast array of different types of people. And they're all walking up to me saying, we haven't met you before. Who are you? What do you do? And
Wow.
just started giving them my background that I'm an accountant. I'm a CPA. I'm an accountant. And I spent most of my career helping to build businesses, working with CFOs. And every single one of them to the T said, this industry needs more people like you in it. So
Wow.
after 2 events and everybody telling me that, I said, you know what? Let me get involved in this industry.
That's awesome. And I mean, and I totally agree. I mean, people like you have a Big Four background, level manager, which is very high level for people that don't know that, and great training as well. And then working in the public world, which is going to be humongous in cannabis with M&A and IPOs. So you've got all these skill sets that are going to be massively needed. And yes, I'm super glad as well that you got in. And I think both just being in New York in general, but then with your skill set, yeah, the world's going to be your oyster. As the next couple of years come involved, you're going to be, you could go so many directions. There are going to be so many of these 50 to $100 million companies being formed that are going to be looking to go public. And you can either go all in with one, or you can take several.
And I
What
have the benefit of living in New Jersey, but close to New York City. So right now I have the benefit of actually
both?
both New Jersey and New York City, who have just recently legalized.
Well,
So
that's
they're both going down the same path right now. Lots of opportunities.
yeah, that's 30 million people right there, at least in those two states. And yeah, it's going to be, I think Colorado has 4 million people and is a $3 billion market. So it's going to be very, very big. What are, let me let you pitch more about your unique skills and traits that you bring, or unique offerings. Do you have any special twist on what you want to serve, or is it all in bookkeeping, CFO, everything?
I'm looking to do everything. I think my background helps me on the CFO front and deal with the high level C-suite execs, for me personally. But what I've done is I've tried to build this to be more than just me, which is why I actually created an LLC with the name Accounting Buds, which everybody seems to love. So I like that. It's not just, Rick LaNeve LLC, because the vision is to do more than just bookkeeping. I have the background dealing with CFOs and CEOs and COOs and boards of directors on a daily basis. Heck, I even with one of my jobs, I won't get into why, but I had to deal with the office of the chief accountant of the SEC, going back and forth and writing letters and corresponding
Wow.
on the phone with him. So I have that background of dealing at a very high level with those types of issues and strategic issues. There's some companies in the cannabis space that need that right now, and that are big, that really need it. There's some smaller ones that don't realize they need it, but they actually need it, and they may actually not be able to afford all of it right now. But so what I have done is I've tried to build up and bring people on that need, the small companies that may need bookkeeping and accounting. And I have someone else on my team help me out do some of that for the small companies, because they're a little cheaper than I am and I oversee what they do. And then for more of the strategic stuff, I do that myself. And the vision is just to keep growing that, right? So as I get more clients, to bring in more. And when I say lower level people on my team, there's still people with like 15 years of experience that are doing the bookkeeping and the accounting, but they are at a lower charge rate than me.
Yes.
For people to do that. And then if there's more work on the strategic side as well, I've got a slew of people that I've worked with in the past that are dying to work with me again, that I could bring in to help me out with some of the strategic issues as well at clients.
So you got, yeah, a very, very complete offering. And I think, yeah, it's great how you're structuring that, because then you can kind of scale as needed. And I think, oh, as we move towards legalization, those other services are going to be really, really increasing quickly. So you told us how you found out about cannabis. How'd you hear about our program, and what made you decide to join, kind of around that, the DOPE CFO program?
So I wanted to, when I decided I wanted to get involved in cannabis, I started doing just a little bit of research to see. And the first thing I was worried about was my CPA license. And I started, so that was the first research I did. And I found out that, the AICPA and most of the state licensing boards have said they're not going to take your license for working with a cannabis company, even though it's illegal at the federal level and it could violate some ethics. They think it's actually better for these companies to have CPAs that know what they're
Yeah.
doing, help them out. So I'm like, okay, that's a relief. Now I can really start, researching. And as I researched, I started reading about 280E, and I said, okay, I need to get more information on this. I'm not necessarily a tax guy to begin with. 280E is a tax rule, but there's also a lot of accounting pieces that go along with it. And that's when I came across DOPE CFO. So I was looking for places to educate myself in the space on the accounting front. I came across your program. This was probably about 2 years ago, and year and a half, 2 years ago, and I looked at it, and I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to spend the investment in the beginning, because it was,
Yeah.
at least then there was a nice chunk of change, and I said, you know what, I think it's probably gonna be worth it, because the amount of what your program described as how you educate and all the work papers you have and everything else, I thought this was this would be worth it. And as I got in there, I realized not only was it worth it, it was far more worth than what we were paying because of all of the marketing advice and how to reach out to cannabis companies and that side of the equation, which I had some experience from with my other company, that my consulting company. But it's kind of a different world in the cannabis space. It's similar, but not quite the same.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And yeah, we try to be a complete program so that, it's kind of slowly evolved where at day one, it was just someone would call me and want a work paper and I'd sell them a work paper. And then it was more work papers. And then now it's 100 work papers. And then out of that, it was like, oh, wait a minute. People are approaching these clients wrong and pricing them wrong and doing marketing all wrong. So I added that in. Then we added in all the education, and then the community got layered over top, which has just been truly awesome as well. Why don't you tell us about the first client you landed, what worked, what didn't work, and how that went? We've heard all kinds of funny stories on here about that.
So I actually landed 2 clients right about the same time. It was about 6 months in. And that's one thing I would tell people is don't expect to, start getting clients overnight. Be prepared. I learned that with my first company, to be prepared. It takes a while to land your first client, where my first company took me about 1.5 years. And I think based on what I've learned from that, I was able to land my first client on the cannabis side in about 6 months. But the first 2 were at the same time. And both of them told me, we're startups. We're not really sure how much we could pay you. I wasn't doing much work at the time, so I still told myself, let me entertain the thought. Let me keep talking to them, because if nothing else, it gets me involved in the space. It gets, sharpens my skills. I hadn't been doing anything for a few months as I was trying to, land clients. It'll get me sharp again. And both of the clients had people leading them that were very connected in the space or well known in general. One of them is a media company, and one of them was a company that was starting a credit card processing for the cannabis space. And I thought to myself, well, just their connections alone might be worth it for me, right? That I do good work for them, they'll tell some of their friends, and all of a sudden I'm, known throughout the cannabis space. One of them worked out really well, and one of them didn't. So one of them, I'm actually a part owner of the company now, because they liked my services. We got along well, and offered me 15% equity in the company to keep working for them a few hours a week. And
that's a really good deal. I've never gotten, I've gotten equity several times, but never anywhere near that. So that's a pretty nice offer.
Exactly. So I'm still doing that's a Cannabis Media company. You'll probably be seeing much more there. It's live now, but you'll be seeing much more about that later. I'll actually say the name if you don't mind me plugging it for a second.
Oh, sure.
The name of that company is Pro Cannabis Media. And you could find it on procannabismedia.com, on Roku, Amazon, a whole bunch of different places. And it's focused on the business side of cannabis, day-to-day news. The other client didn't work out as well. So that client I actually ended up dropping them about 2 or 3 months ago. They were slow paying. They told me they're going to be slow paying, but they were very slow paying, like 7 months. As I was digging through their books, I had noticed they had been through, they'd asked me to just finish their books for 2020. So I did that and got them clean.
Yeah, got them caught up.
We need 18 and 19 done. So I started working on that. When I was in the middle of that, they said, oh, wait, we need you to go all the way back to 15. So I explained to them that I could do that. It's going to take more time. And the way that when we talked before, you had me fix 18 and 19. I just booked everything to retained earnings at the beginning to make sure it was clean. I didn't care about the other years. Yeah. So now I'm going to go back and redo 18 as well to some degree. And they were like, oh my God, there's too many hours. And when I started looking into their books just for those prior years, just to get a feel for them, I realized that between 17 and 20, they'd been through 5 accounting firms.
Oh, see, yeah.
So that was just the last red flag I needed to say, you know what? This isn't working out anymore. They owed me about $10,000 at the time. It was at 10. I had them pay me 5 before I did any more work. It got back up to 10, and I just said, that's it. And when they went to go pay me, they were hemming and hawing a lot. They were like, what if we give you referrals instead and things like that. And I said, that could work, but it's not going to be a $1 to $1 reduction of your bill for referrals. And
Yeah.
also, if you want me to do any sort of review of your financials or sign off on your financials in any way for a bank or something, I can't, because now we have a relationship that's not independent anymore. And they
That's,
understand that.
so that's, I mean, that's great experience on a lot of fronts. But first you mentioned, yeah, it took 6 months. So there, someone asked me yesterday, I was like, there is some luck involved too. I can think of Tammy or Cam, who just right off the bat, Tammy, very first email. I said, most people are not going to get a client that's 6 figures off their first email
Right.
while you still have a full-time job. There was luck involved. But
Sure.
you know, I look back over my 20-year career, and I got my audit manager job with Grant Thornton um, through just totally lucky meeting out of the middle of nowhere. So so I think we should all expect luck favors are prepared. We're going to get lucky sometimes. We're going to get unlucky sometimes. But that's a great story about how you got in, and we got to be able to let go of the bad clients. There are some shady characters in this space, and we got to turn them over. But also just how at first you can, there's so many benefits. Like we have a pricing tool in our program, and it's priced for, we'll spit out a pretty big range, because if it's like, okay, you got 8 entities and you're this and that, maybe it should be somewhere between 5 and 8 grand a month. But that said, if you're brand new, you have no clients, you're looking to learn and meet people, you might even work for free for 3 months. Because you, like you said, you'll be learning, you'll be meeting people. You might even get, if they like you, they might send you out like Carlos. He got a dispensary client and they took him to 3 huge growers because they loved him so much. And so you can't only think in dollars. You got to think your personal situation and where you go. So
What I'd
that's
actually add to
huge.
that too is the interesting piece to me on that side is I don't take clients at low cost. Okay, like if someone wanted to pay me not a lot, I won't take them as a client. Yet, like I turned down work that was below my dollar range,
Yeah.
but I took a free client, which may sound crazy, but to me, there's a different reason for it. The free client, they had um, connections that were going to be beneficial for me, and then even the client that I dropped, the connections that the person had, he was one of 2 founders of a giant cannabis company, which I won't say the name because then you would know who he is. So there was huge opportunity there. And I will say also, I've used your pricing tool before, and I think it's pretty accurate. I think there's a lot of people in the group that feel that spits out numbers that are too high, but that's what you want to be shooting for. Why not try to, you should be trying to get the high paying clients in my mind, instead of working for 100 clients that aren't paying anything, work for 1 or 2 clients that'll pay you the same as those 100.
Yeah. So that I totally agree with that too. And so the pricing tool, there is art and science. And I tell a big thing that people sometimes miss. I'm like, the last piece of the price quote is the individual. Because so say I can think of one guy in our program that was a CFO for 30 years of a $1 billion company. He's over 60. He's not taking any client if it's not less than 10 grand a month. He just wants to work a day a week, whatever,
Yep.
just have fun. But someone else who wants to put bread on the table or whatever, you've got to see where you're going. So I did the same thing. My very first client in Bend, I wasn't really doing anything. They were a lab. They needed help with due diligence. They were going to acquire other labs, and they were one of these reverse merger penny stocks. Their
Okay.
shares were actually worth, I think, a 50th of a penny. And they gave me, I forgot how many shares, 50,000 shares or something. And I was just like, I wanted to see if I liked the industry, see what was going on, meet some people, which I did. So I did all that stuff, and I would have gladly, like you said, just worked for free. I probably worked, I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 weeks and just very little weeks. Those shares ended up, I think they netted like 60 grand or something.
Wow.
It was totally lucky. And it was like 2 years later.
Yeah.
And it was, and even now the shares are a penny a share, but they spiked to like 4 cents a share at one point, and I sold them.
Got out the right time.
I got out at the right time. So, But let me ask you too, this has been a great informative podcast. I wanted to ask you though about the New York State. See, like it's interesting to me, it just went legal, but they've already got a New York State CPA Cannabis Committee.
Yep,
That sounds awesome to me. So tell me about that and I think that's gonna maybe lead to a lot of stuff.
I do too. I've only been a member of it for about 6 months, since I've only been in the space for about a year and a half, and I just got in contact with the right people. What's interesting though, to your point, the committee's been around for 3 or 4 years already, as far as I can tell. So they've already had, one or two, people that are in charge, the president of the committee or whatever, chair of the committee. They've had
Yeah.
1 or 2 terms already, so they've been around for a while. From what I could tell, it's probably about 30 or 40 CPAs in New York State. We get together every 2 months, and right now it's virtually, so I haven't been as involved as I'd like to be, because the virtual meetings aren't quite the same as the in-person
In
ones.
person.
But it's all CPAs that are part of the New York State Society of CPAs. For the meetings, we also invite lawyers sometimes that are interested, or other people interested in just getting involved in the space. But we discuss a lot of its national news for the first 1 or 2, but with everything picking up in New York State, we've also started discussing quite a bit of New York State specifically. The first meeting I was in there, we were actually talking about New Jersey a lot, because New Jersey had just passed it, and a lot of us that are in the city are very close to New Jersey as well. But the conversation started picking up about New York when Governor Cuomo first started talking about this. During one of our meetings, someone summarized what the draft legislation was. They had gone through and read the whole thing, and we discussed it quite a bit, and then decided that 3 or 4 of our members would get together and actually write a letter to the governor and other state representatives as to what we thought about the legislation, both from an accounting side, a tax side, and
Wow.
just, I think they also put a social equity component to the letter as well, because a lot of people feel very strongly about that as well. So the society wrote that letter. And I think one of the big pieces of it too was the taxation side of it, because at least in the draft, I've been a little busy personally to look at the final legislation, but I know the draft legislation had an extremely high tax rate for New York State. So people were worried that in reality, all it's going to do is keep the illegal market going, because no one's going to want to pay double or triple, to get the same product.
So we talk about that in our program, the kind of the P and VIP of participating. And so I think that's awesome. And you just don't even know where it's going to lead over time. It could lead to clients or whatever, and getting involved in other groups as well. So that's amazing as well. Before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance. Well, first off, let me ask one more question. Is there any advice you would give to our listeners that are thinking about entering the cannabis or CBD accounting space, whether they're in a legal state, a non-legal state? Give us some advice, and then we'll close. I want to let you share a little more about your program.
I have 1 or 2 pieces of advice there. I think one of them, anybody that's already part of the program and is on the Facebook group would recognize me giving this reply every time someone asks a question, because I think every new person asks the same question, whether they should form an LLC or just go out on their own, or what they should do about banking accounts. My personal opinion and thoughts are, especially if you're in this cannabis space, which is everybody's focused on from a regulatory compliance aspect of it, create an LLC, keep it separate from any other bookkeeping or management company or any other LLCs you have. Keep the banking separate, just keep everything separate, because from my opinion, you're decreasing risk that way. And even if something happens, it doesn't happen that often anymore, but a bank account gets frozen or something like that, they're not freezing your bank account for your entire, like all of your businesses. It's just this business. The other thing I think is, I learned this quickly when I went to my first 1 or 2 networking meetings. Branding is extremely important in this industry. The first 1 or 2 networking meetings I went with my business card for my management consulting company, Your Chief Advisors, and talking to people, and they didn't quite get it. So then, like, they explained it to me, and I told them what I did. They all got what I did after I talked to them. And then I decided one day just to create the Accounting Buds brand and create an LLC, create a logo. I want to keep my business separate, right? So I needed something different. I figured I would brand it towards, cannabis. And as soon as I did that, one, people instantly understood what I did. And two, they wanted me involved in their business. And I've found that if you have, like, the cannabis industry seems to be very much focused on working with others that are specifically in this industry.
Yes, they're a big culture.
Yeah. And then the last thing I would recommend, I would say, is when in-person networking starts up in your area, go to the in-person networking events for cannabis. As I mentioned before, they're completely different than any other networking events you've been to. For me, that was a good thing. And everybody that I've encountered so far is extremely welcoming. And they're not only welcoming, they're, oh, I'm going to put you in touch with this person or that person. That's how I ended up getting on the New York State Society of CPA's Cannabis Committee. Someone I talked to said, oh, I know the chairman of the committee. Let me send you, let me email you both and
Yeah,
touch. And that's
that
what.
is awesome. Awesome advice. And by the way, if you're listening, we should have this up on YouTube as well. And then you'll be able to see behind Rick. He's got his brand it's awesome. It's, the logo looks great and you can tell instantly this is cannabis or CBD related. So tell us real quick, for listeners who don't have the video, where they can find you. We will have links in the
Yep.
show notes too, and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so the name of the company is Accounting Buds. The website is acctbuds.com. You don't have to type out the whole word accounting, it's just an abbreviation there. And you could also find me, on LinkedIn using my name or the company name. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter. Twitter is probably better because I post more news stories and everything there. They're both at ACCT and those are the best places, to find me.
Awesome. And we will put that all in the show notes. This has been hugely good call, lots of input. I think you are at the cusp of where you're going to see some crazy things happening very soon with
I
what
hope
you're
so.
doing. And but thank you so much for being on the show. And we will see you back in our community as well.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.